If you want to make your own lap steel guitar, you might want to download these plans that I created. I started out by selecting a nice bit of recycled timber and then checking to see if there are any nails still left in there. I docked the timber to about 800mm long and then dressed it all around to approximately 40mm thick by 200mm wide. Using the template that I generated in the plans, I'm going to set the depth of the router to about 35mm, and using a 30mm guide bushing with a 19mm cutting bit, I'm going to create the cutouts. You have to make sure that it's clamped down extremely well and that the clamps are out of the way of the router base. Once the routing's complete, you can draw your overall shape of the body of the guitar. One of the most critical dimensions to get right is the sidewall thickness of the head of the guitar, where the 3 inline machine heads need to go. This needs to be exactly 5mm, and I'll explain this a little bit further later on. The next step for me is creating the fretboard and the pickguard. Now, I do have the luxury of access to a laser cutter, which is very helpful, but if you don't have one, you can actually print these out, even on paper, and then stick them to a bit of wood and cut out by hand or using a jigsaw or a bandsaw. To cut out the main body shape, I use a bandsaw, but you can also use a jigsaw. Try to cut as close to the lines as you can on the waist side to save on sanding afterwards. I'll use a linisher as well as some hand sanding blocks to get the shape I want. Hard sanding blocks with rough paper are pretty good for getting exactly the shape you require. And if you want to create some round edges, you can get the spoke shave out to create a nice fillet in certain areas. To complete the shaping, you want to use progressively finer sandpaper all over the body of your guitar. Whenever you're applying colour or a finish to a guitar, it's always a good idea to test out that same colour combination on a scrap bit of material. In this example, I'm using aniline dye to colour my timber. Aniline dye is a pigment that's soluble in both water and alcohol. Differing grain direction allows for a variety in the penetration power of the aniline dye. I've started by covering the body with a black dye, and then after about 12 hours sanding back to reveal some of that grain. The next phase for me was to colour the whole body blue and then blend in a black around the outside to create a sunburst finish. This blending process does take a bit of practice, so I recommend trying it out on a scrap bit of timber. And once you're happy with the colour, you can apply a finish in either varnish or oil or whatever you have available. Now I have to drill the holes for the 3 inline machine heads, so I make up a little template with the holes marked out in exactly the right location. For the machine heads that I bought, the diameter of the hole was 6mm and the spacing between shaft centres is 35mm. It's important to check here that the machine heads are placed at the right height so they can actually still turn. Once you've drilled your template, you can clamp it in position and get ready for drilling. It's a good idea to tightly pack that router hole with a sacrificial bit of timber. This will prevent the drill from blowing out on the other side. Strings can have a fair bit of tension on them, so the shafts of the machine heads need to penetrate right through the other side of the router hole. Make sure you drill the other side evenly, and then you can fit the machine heads. Before attaching the fretboard and pickguard, I'm going to countersink all the screw holes, as I designed this guitar to have a 600mm fret scale. The critical factor when attaching this fretboard is to make sure that the nut to saddle length, or the fret scale, is exactly 600mm. Then it's a matter of pre-drilling the holes and fitting your screws. The electrics of this guitar are simply a single coil pickup with a volume and tone knob as well as a jack. The pickup can be installed first. Take note that the spring is in between the pickguard and the pickup. Then you can attach the volume tone potentiometers as well as the jack by inserting the shaft and tightening up a washer and screw on top of it. I'm laser cutting my nut and saddle here, but if you don't have access to a laser, you can cut these out by hand. I'm also cutting a couple of volume and tone knobs as well, but these generally come with a pickup when you buy one. In the design of the pickguard, you might have noticed that there are 6 holes for the strings to be inserted. If you use a drill press and drill through all of these 6 holes, you'll find a good way of locating your strings. And you can use a hand drill with a forcener bit slightly larger to drill through a little bit on the other side of the guitar. This allows the ball end of the string to be held in position when you're tightening up the strings. So now that the lap steel is pretty much complete, you can put the strings on. With a lap steel, you do want to try and use relatively heavy gauge strings. You start with the heaviest gauge string and poke it through from the other side of the guitar. You feed it all the way through and pull it up to the head end of the guitar and pull it past the first machine head by about 1.5 inches. Make a little bit of a notch here because this is where you're going to attach it. You can then retract the string to the notch, making sure you've got slackness in the string, and then begin winding. When the string's getting up to full tension, you want to slow down and listen to the tone of the string so you don't over tighten. You might notice that while I'm winding, I'm creating a bit of tension with my right hand as I wind with my left hand, and I completely ignore the free end of the string, as this can be cut to length after you've attached all the strings. Thanks for watching, and I hope you're successful in making your lap steel guitar.